and Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitri Petelin are just hours away from departing the International Space Station to begin a belated trip back to Earth and to their families. Welcome in to Mission Control in Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center, where shift handover has just been completed. The Orbit 1 team of flight controllers now on duty under the direction of Flight Director Chris Dobbins as we prepare for the homecoming of this trio of crew members from Expedition 69 aboard the International Space Station and the completion of a mission of more than a year, 371 days to be exact. We'll talk more about their record-breaking statistics in just a moment. At this hour, as we mentioned, Chris Dobbins is the flight director on console here in Mission Control. He is joined on console at the top of your screen by veteran astronaut Aki Hoshide from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, no stranger to Soyuz operations, as he'll be talking to the International Space Station crew throughout the overnight hours, as Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin are just minutes away from saying farewell to their Expedition 69 crewmates. Expedition 69 will turn into Expedition 70 at the time that the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft undocks from the International Space Station just 3 hours and 51 minutes from now. They will be heading home as you look at a view of the Russian Mission Control Center in the town of Korolyov outside of Moscow, where Russian flight controllers will be talking to the Soyuz crew and guiding them through all the procedures relative to their undocking from the space station and the deorbit burn and entry back into the Earth's atmosphere that will result in a touchdown on a remote area on the steppe of Kazakhstan in south-central Kazakhstan at 6:17 and 33 seconds a.m. Central Time this morning, which will be 5:17 and 33 seconds p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan. The weather at the landing site is forecast to be ideal, just some scattered clouds forecast at 7,000 feet, visibility of 6 miles plus, with a temperature of about 69 degrees Fahrenheit to greet the three crew members. Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin are completing the third longest spaceflight in human spaceflight history at 371 days, eclipsed only by Valery Polyakov, 438 days, and Sergei Avdeyev's mission of 380 days. And of course, for Frank Rubio, the 371 days represents an American spaceflight record, the longest mission ever by an American astronaut. We'll talk more about statistics in just a second. The Soyuz spacecraft, which is docked on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station, as you see in this view, it is docked to the Prichal module, the node module, that is attached to the top of the Naoka multipurpose laboratory module. The three crew members have been awake for several hours now. They have activated the Soyuz systems. The Soyuz now on autonomous power as we're preparing in the next few minutes to see Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin say farewell for the final time to their Expedition 69 crewmates and float into their Soyuz to don their Sokol launch and entry suits and begin the procedures that will lead to the undocking of the Soyuz and eventually to its landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan.
No, I did not send those commands yet.
This mission, a record breaker for Frank Rubio, as we mentioned a moment ago, will have spanned 371 days, 5,936 orbits of the Earth, a mission that will have spanned 157.4 million miles, roughly the equivalent of 328 round trips to the moon and back. For Sergei Prokopyev, he will have logged 371 days on this mission, of course, and will have totaled 568 days in space on his two flights, placing him 12th on the all-time list for most days in space. For Petelin and Rubio, of course, this being their first flight, they will have logged 371 days in space. During their mission, which began just over a year ago, the crew saw the arrival of 15 visiting vehicles. 14 visiting vehicles departed the International Space Station. Prokopyev conducted 6 spacewalks during this mission, along with Petelin. They conducted those Russian spacewalks together, all 6 of them. Frank Rubio conducted 3 spacewalks of his own, totaling 21 hours, 24 minutes of spacewalking time.
KS7 is illuminated. Which one?
KS7,
KS7. Check the LEDs.
As the 3 crew members prepare to depart the International Space Station, there was a change of command ceremony earlier this morning in which Sergei Prokopyev, the outgoing station commander, handed over the keys of the kingdom to the European Space Agency's Andreas Mogensen, who is now the commander of the station and will be the commander for the duration of his mission aboard the International Space Station as part of the Dragon Crew 7 crew. Let's take a look at that change of command ceremony that occurred on Tuesday morning.
And I want just to say thank you to all mission control centers. It was a great time for me to work with you together. Thank you for your supporting, and I think I'm looking forward to work you together again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sergei. It's an honor to take over as commander of the International Space Station and to relieve you and your crew. Sergei, Frank, and Dmitri, you have shown resilience, professionalism, and grace in the face of unexpected challenges and significant uncertainty. It's one thing to launch to space knowing that you're going to be up here for a year. It's a completely different thing for you and your families to find out towards the end of your 6-month mission that you're going to be spending an additional 6 months in space. But you took it upon your shoulders and you excelled. And along the way, you performed, Dmitri and Sergei, 6 spacewalks and Frank 3. And by the end of it, you had set a new record for the longest spaceflight by a U.S. astronaut. And perhaps most remarkably of all, you flew in space during your mission with 28 other individuals. Your competence, dedication, and hard work is also abundantly clear to me and my Expedition 70 crewmates. The space station is tidy, organized, and work up here is flowing smoothly and efficiently, and that's in large part thanks to your hard work during the last year. On behalf of Expedition 70, I would like to thank you for setting us up for success. We hope to leave the space station in as good a condition as we found it in. No one deserves to go home to their families more than you. We wish you a smooth flight and a soft landing. Give our love to everyone at home, and congratulations on completing your successful mission.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll start Expedition 70.
Expedition 70 formally begins with the undocking of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft that is scheduled 3 hours and 44 minutes from now. But Andy Mogensen is now the commander of the station. You see in this crew portrait of Expedition 70 from left to right, Roscosmos cosmonaut Nikolai Chub and Konstantin Borisov, Mogensen, Oleg Kononenko, who along with Chub is going to spend a year on the International Space Station, Jasmine Mugbelli, the NASA astronaut who was part of the Crew 7 crew, Satoshi Furukawa of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, and NASA astronaut Laurel O'Hara, who launched just a couple of weeks ago on a Soyuz MS-24 spacecraft to begin her 6-month stint on the International Space Station.
45.
Переходные люки должны быть закрыты.
Transfer hatches must be closed.
Да, принято.
Copy 745. Transfer hatch closure. Prior to closure, work page 25.
You hear through the interpreter Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center talking to Sergei Prokopyev. He is the Soyuz commander. He will be in the center seat of the Soyuz descent module. It's a 3-section spacecraft, The uppermost section that you see at the top of your screen is the instrumentation and propulsion module, where the engines and thrusters are located. The center section where the crew is strapped in is the descent module, and the upper section is the orbital module. Those three sections will separate pyrotechnically before the descent module enters the Earth's atmosphere with its heat shield pointed in the direction of travel.
Go ahead, Sergei, on space to ground 1.
In Kazakhstan, the NASA team, which is embedded with the Russian search and recovery forces comprising Rosaviatsia, that's the civil search and recovery agency that is responsible for the landing operations for Soyuz crews returning from the International Space Station. That team of NASA and Russian landing personnel are about to board helicopters to fly 2 hours from the staging city in Karaganda, Kazakhstan, to an intermediary staging site in the town of Zhezkazgan. The helicopters that will be deployed by the search and recovery forces will be flying to the intermediary landing site in Zhezkazgan to refuel before they take off around the time of the deorbit burn. We'll talk about the sequence of events leading up to the landing itself here in a moment. Those helicopters will refuel in Zhezkazgan and then fly about 35 minutes over a 90-mile stretch from Zhezkazgan to the landing site to begin the process of extracting the crew from the Soyuz descent module and placing them in a nearby inflatable medical tent where they'll get out of their Sokol launch and entry suits into more comfortable flight clothing, receive medical exams, and then be placed in 3 different helicopters for the 2-hour flight back to Karaganda, where they will split up, with Rubio boarding a NASA Gulfstream jet to fly back to Houston, and Prokopyev and Petelin boarding a Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center aircraft to fly back to their homes in Star City, their training base at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center.
Moscow Station, Sergei, did you have a look?
Sergei?
Yes, we did. Everything is good. We could see everything. We will pass on this information. Moscow Station on space to ground 1. Oleg, there are LOSs from time to time. Now we are receiving a good video. Thank you for that. So you got it, I hope that I'm not taking any pictures. Yes, we understand.
And now this view inside the Prichal module of the International Space Station. You're looking at Russian cosmonaut, I believe that's Konstantin Borisov, who is along with Oleg Kononenko and Nikolai Chub, who will be part of Expedition 70 at the time of undocking that is scheduled just over 3.5 hours from now. There's a view of the Soyuz spacecraft as the International Space Station flies 255 statute miles over the South Atlantic, or rather the South Indian Ocean, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. Again, the Soyuz is scheduled to undock at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 3:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. Once the hatch to both the station and the Soyuz spacecraft is closed, the Soyuz crew on their side of the docking interface and the International Space Station crew on their side of the docking interface at Prichal. They'll conduct a series of leak checks before that vestibule, the small passageway between the Soyuz and the International Space Station, is depressurized to vacuum. That will set the stage for hooks to be open and springs on both sides of the docking interface to push off against one another for physical separation of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft. There will be 2 separation burns from Soyuz's thrusters to initiate an opening rate away from the space station, placing it later into a safe distance away from the complex for the deorbit burn that is scheduled just after 5:24 a.m. Central Time, 6:24 a.m. Eastern Time. That will be a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde braking maneuver to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, enabling it to drop out of orbit to begin its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. Some 27 minutes after the deorbit burn, the pyros will initiate a separation of the 3 sections of the Soyuz. The orbital module and the instrumentation and propulsion module will separate from the descent module, which is where the crew will be seated. The direction of travel will place the heat shield of the Soyuz into the direction of travel to ablate or repel the heat that will build up around the Soyuz as it enters the Earth's atmosphere. That heat builds up to about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit before leaving the harshest regime of the entry portion of the descent back to Earth. Some 15 minutes before touchdown, the command will be issued to open up the parachutes on the Soyuz spacecraft at an altitude of about 6.7 miles or 10.8 kilometers, and about 14.5 to 15 minutes later, touchdown will occur. The soft landing thrusters on the Soyuz will fire about a second or two before touchdown, and Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin will be back on Earth for the first time in 371 days. Just a few minutes from now, we'll be back inside the Prichal module to watch Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin say farewell to their crewmates aboard the International Space Station before they float into the Soyuz and close the hatch that will begin the critical phase of the pre-undocking preparations that will take place over the course of the next several hours. Once they close the hatch to the Soyuz, and the hatch is closed on the station side of the docking interface, the crew will begin to don their Sokol launch and entry suits and will make their way into the descent module to strap themselves into their respective seats in the Soyuz. This is the configuration that they'll be in if you look head on to where the crew will be seated. Prokopyev, as the Soyuz commander, will be in the center seat, flanked to his left by Dmitri Petelin, who will be board engineer number 1, and to his right by Frank Rubio, who is board engineer number 2. As mentioned earlier, the operation tonight and through the course of the overnight hours is being conducted primarily by the Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow in the town of Korolyov. You see this view from a balcony camera overlooking their International Space Station flight control room. They will be talking directly to the Soyuz crew throughout the course of the undocking, the orbit burn, and the entry phase. Once the Soyuz begins to approach the landing site in Kazakhstan, voice and data will be relayed through an Antonov fixed-wing aircraft that will be flying in the vicinity of the landing site, operating as a relay station to provide data and voice capability back to those flight controllers you see in Korolyov. The Rosaviatsa search and recovery forces will be circling the landing zone in their respective Russian Mi-8 helicopters with the NASA personnel on board. And once the Soyuz touches down, they will land in sequential fashion near the spacecraft itself to begin the process of extracting the crew, who will be placed in those reclining chairs that you're familiar with, that will be placed just alongside the capsule to enable the crew to have several minutes of an opportunity to get their equilibrium. This will be the first time in over a year that they'll be experiencing Earth's gravity, so it's going to take some time for their equilibrium to return to normal. But they'll be undergoing rehabilitation once they return respectively to Houston and to Star City to facilitate their return back to their pre-flight conditioning. Once they have had an opportunity in those reclining chairs to get their equilibrium back a bit, those crew members will be hoisted in the chairs and brought into a nearby inflatable medical tent to get out of those Sokol launch and entry suits and into their flight clothing to return to the helicopters after medical exams are conducted for the 2-hour flight back to Karaganda to split up for the first time in over a year and to return to their respective homes in Houston and into Star City. A good view of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft docked to the Prichal module, which is the node module, a multi-hatched docking port for multiple vehicles at the Russian segment of the station. And now we're back inside Prichal at the hatchway to the Soyuz as the crew is beginning to gather for final farewells before the Soyuz crew floats through the hatch and closes the hatch behind them to begin their pre-undocking preparations.
У вас выходы будут, понадобятся. Нет, просто так. Заглушка может быть готова, да.
The cap is ready. We'll use it before hatch closure.
Oleg Kononenko in the foreground, now in his 5th flight into space, When he returns a year from now, along with Nikolai Chub, Kononenko will have accrued more than 1,000 days in space. He'll be at the top of the list for the most days in space by a human. The International Space Station currently flying over the Indian Ocean, about to cross into Southeast Asia, flying over Jakarta, Indonesia. And a view of Frank Rubio, soon to depart the International Space Station. Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin originally were scheduled to spend just 6 months on the station, but a coolant leak developed in their original Soyuz that brought them to the station, the Soyuz MS-22, back on December 14th last year, and a replacement Soyuz was launched unpiloted and automatically docked to the station. That's the Soyuz MS-23 that they'll be returning home in a short time from now. And the Soyuz commander, Sergei Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin. NASA's Laurel O'Hara in the field of view. A few final pictures being taken. And Jasmine Mugbeli. Nikolai Chub now in the field of view. Once this farewell opportunity is concluded, Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin will float inside the Soyuz, and Kononenko will begin the process of closing the hatch on the Prichal module side of the docking interface. The Soyuz hatch will be closed, and the Soyuz crew, the departing crew, will begin to don their Sokol launch and entry suits. The new station commander, Andy Mogensen from the European Space Agency, playing the role of photographer. Right behind the crew is the hatchway to the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft. Sergei Prokopyev, the commander, on the left side of your screen. He will be entering undocking settings and deorbit settings for some of the data that will be placed in the Soyuz computers. All of the actions by the Soyuz will be automatically triggered by those computer commands, including the deorbit burn and the separation of the modules, and ultimately the deployment of the parachutes about 15 minutes before touchdown on the steppe of Kazakhstan. And not to be outdone, Konstantin Borisov now in the field of view. And with the photo fest now having been completed, final handshakes between the crew members. And we'll be seeing Prokopyev, Petelin, and Rubio enter the Soyuz vehicle momentarily. Sergei Prokopyev entering the Soyuz with his crewmates. They are entering into the upper section of the Soyuz called the orbital module, which is basically designed to provide the crew members a bit of space before they move into the center section, which is the descent module of the spacecraft.
You can start closing the hatches. Copy, it's a go.
Sergei,
please confirm that you are done with the step 3.2 on page 25, which is preparation.
Russian flight controllers have given the crew members on board the station the green light to close the transfer hatch, that is the station hatch, on that side of the docking interface. The Prichal module is the node module that is mated to the very top of the Naoka multipurpose laboratory module on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the station. The station hatch will be closed first, followed by the Soyuz hatch, and that will initiate the start of leak checks over the course of an orbit or so to make sure that we have an airtight seal between the two docking interfaces before the depressurization of the passageway is conducted.
Alтай, по Москве
Altai,
есть
Moscow.
разрешение на закрытие
You
переходных люков.
go to close.
Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin all inside the Soyuz MS-23 now. The Soyuz scheduled to undock 3 hours and 15 minutes from now. Undocking scheduled at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 3:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. There will be an undocking command to begin the process of opening the hooks holding the Soyuz to the Prichal module docking port. That takes about 90 seconds to complete before the springs push off on both sides of the docking interface to initiate the physical separation of the vehicle. At the time of undocking, Expedition 69 will come to an end. Expedition 70 formally begins. And there goes the hatch on the Prichal module side of the docking interface.
Ignat, S4 and S6 are no longer illuminated. Copy.
Sergei, но у нас есть разрешение.
And the hatch closed on the Prichal module at 11:38 p.m. Central Time, 12:38 a.m. Eastern Time. So once again, Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin are now inside their return craft, the Soyuz MS-23. The hatch on the station side, the Prichal module hatch, has been closed. The three departing crew members will be closing the Soyuz hatch momentarily, having bid farewell to their crewmates and to their home that they have lived in for over a year, returning home this morning after 371 days in space, the third longest spaceflight in human spaceflight history.
На связи.
The Soyuz systems were activated a couple of hours ago. The Soyuz on autonomous power, no longer on station power that it has been on for the past 371 days.
Значит, Сергей, тогда работаем по 28 странице.
Now go to page 28 and proceed with the steps. Inward.
And we now have confirmation that the Soyuz hatch is closed at 11:41 p.m. Central Time, 12:41 a.m. Eastern Time. So the hatches on both sides of the docking interface are now closed. Leak checks will get underway, and the departing crew, Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin, will begin to don their Sokol launch and entry suits.
Give me my tablet, please.
Just for your awareness, Moscow, the KVD valve is an electrical control. Copy, KVD or equalization valve of the vehicle is an electrical control. Copy.
Сергей, можно камеру отключить?
Sergei, do we ever go to deactivate the camera? Thank you so much for your video stream. You have a go to deactivate the camera. Okay, copy. It's a go to switch off camera.
Добрый день еще раз. Это Владимир.
Олег, hello. This is Vladimir.
Откуда брали?
Could you please tell me for our awareness what kind of cable with the extender did you use?
Сергей, работает правильно, да?
Sergey,
Oh,
you are
we
working
use
for page
the
28,
cable
right?
that
So
you
please go ahead and
recommended.
report as you go.
Okay,
Copy
it is
Moscow, how copy?
427.
This is Altai 2.
All right,
Dima,
could
we
you
copy
please
loud and clear.
put it back where you...
So with the Soyuz crew now safely aboard their return vehicle, the Soyuz MS-23, which was launched back in February as a replacement vehicle for the damaged Soyuz MS-22 spacecraft that carried Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin to the station just over a year ago. It developed a coolant leak back on December 14th and needed to be replaced to provide a safe passage home for these three crew members. So the Soyuz MS-23 was launched in February without a crew on board, automatically docked to the Prichal module, and now today is being used as the return vehicle for Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin. The Soyuz MS-22, the damaged vehicle, landed autonomously on the steppe of Kazakhstan in the same location as this crew will be touching down several hours from now. In Kazakhstan, the NASA and Russian personnel comprising the landing team are airborne in Russian Mi-8 helicopters heading from Karaganda, the staging city, to the interim staging city of Zhezkazgan to the southwest of Karaganda, where those helicopters will be refueled at an airstrip in Zhezkazgan for about a 35-minute flight later this morning to the landing site itself. Those helos will take off around the time of the deorbit burn.
D7 is not illuminated.
The critical phase of the landing will begin with the undocking of the Soyuz from the Prichal module, as you see in this animation, at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time. Two separation burns will create an opening rate by the Soyuz to a safe distance away from the International Space Station for the firing of the engines and the deorbit burn, a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde firing that will slow the spacecraft down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit. At 5:51 and 58 seconds a.m. Central Time, pyros will fire to separate the three sections of the Soyuz, with the descent module, the center section, the only section that survives the heat of reentry that will build up to about 2,500 degrees around the spacecraft. 15 minutes before touchdown, the parachutes will begin their deployment. First a extraction chute, then a drogue chute, and then the main parachute, enabling the Soyuz to descend toward its landing site on the steppe of Kazakhstan. The soft landing thrusters will fire just a second or two off the ground, and then touchdown will be accomplished, and the three crew members will be home after more than a year in space. So all of that activity is yet to come throughout the course of the morning. Again, you're looking at a view of the Soyuz MS-23 with Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin on board, beginning their pre-undocking preparations. They'll be donning their Sokol launch and entry suits a short time from now and conducting all of the other activities that will lead to the leak checks and the final go from the Russian flight controllers in Korolyov at the Russian Mission Control Center for the undocking of the Soyuz 3 hours, 5 minutes, and 45 seconds from now. We'll be back on the air for undocking coverage at 2:30 a.m. Central Time, 3:30 a.m. Eastern Time for the undocking of the Soyuz and the departure of Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin from the home that has been their place to live and work for the past 371 days. So come back a few hours from now. We'll be back on the air again at 2:30 Central Time, 3:30 a.m. Eastern Time with Soyuz undocking coverage. In the meantime, we'll sign off for now. This is Mission Control Houston.